Thank you very much. Accessibility in VR. Virtual reality, this is a quote that I said, so I like quoting myself. Virtual reality is a unique platform with unique accessibility challenges. How quickly and thoroughly we address those challenges will affect the adoption rate and acceptance of the medium at large. And when I did this talk at the VR AR Collective as a test earlier this week, I put at the end, no pressure though, because those are people who are working in the VR and AR fields. And I'm just kind of letting them know that this is going to have a direct impact on how quickly and how thoroughly VR is accepted amongst the community. So here's a little introduction and outline. I'm going to do a little point on hello, my name is, talk about a little bit about accessibility as a concept and how it relates to VR, what makes virtual reality a unique platform and the unique challenges it creates for accessibility, and also let you guys know what developers and gamers can do to advance VR accessibility. And then finally, a little bit about the future of VR. As you guys may have heard various details trickling out of GDC today, there's a lot of advances being made very quickly in the virtual reality field. New players coming in, new sorts of controllers, new sorts of input methods, new sorts of output methods, and new companies getting involved in the field of both hardware and software. So it's changing rapidly, but some of the data I'll be able to give you today will directly impact it regardless of what the hardware future is. So there's a little about myself. My name is Buren. I'm the narrative designer of Tomorrow Today Labs, which is a small independent video game studio based out of Seattle, Washington. I am also a VR accessibility analyst and advocate. I have been working in the VR field in accessibility for a while now, going to these events, talking to people about accessibility in VR, and also going to helping developers, especially indie developers based out of Seattle, to try to make their projects more accessible. Worked in the video game industry for over a decade, worked at Nintendo, 17-bit Sierra Games. I worked as a tester, text editor, writer, and now I'm a designer. I've been working in VR since 2015, mostly on, I earlier today misspoke and said 2005, and it's like, oh crap, I would have been the virtual boy. But mostly on the HTC Vive using Unity. I attended the University of Arizona, and I studied creative writing and journalism, go Wildcats. So of course I'm a designer working in tech. I always like to bring that up because I always like to hear different stories that people have on how they came into the gaming field. It's not all computer science or design background. Various different ways that we can get into this. So let's talk about the specific conceptual level of accessibility. So one definition is another. I was doing the terrible job that writers do of using a definition when they start their essay or whatnot. And one of the various definitions I came across on accessibility, this is off the Wikipedia site, is accessibility is the ability to access a system or entity. And I like that very much in regards to video games and computers at large. The case of computers and video game systems, the way you access a system is through both input into the system, input data in some fashion, or input out of the system that transfers the data that the system has done and the calculations it's made and puts them to you. For instance, we already know input and output fairly well in video games and computer. What I have here is a mouse and keyboard, and we have a pretty good idea how that setup works. And that's for computers. For video game consoles, you have the Xbox controller, the PlayStation controller, and whatever Nintendo decides to use this console generation. So those are input methods. You press buttons, you press keys, you move mouses, you move control pads, control surfaces in order to get data into the system, which it then interprets and calculates and moves on to the next thing. And then you have output from the system to you. In this instance, we have a computer monitor and an HD television, which look exactly the same. Sorry, I couldn't find. I was either that or a picture of an old television. I didn't think that was worth it. But those output data to you through visual information. They output data to you through the speakers, through audio information, and in some instances, even the controllers themselves can give you feedback through haptics, through vibration, and other sorts of things. Now, one of the definitions of disability, and this is kind of riffing off Ian's, is the mismatch between the capacity of the user and the requirements of that system or entity. So the ability to input the data into or receive data from the computer or video game system does not match the capacities of the user. For instance, a blind user trying to play a video game, trying to play something that does not have text-to-speech, or a hearing impaired user trying to use a game that doesn't have subtitles, or a user with limited motor control trying to use a controller that does not have mappable button options, or that does not have, or trying to use a keyboard that does not support macros, so it does not support wand support. So what makes VR different? The most important thing with virtual reality, in my opinion, is the unique output method, which is the head-mounted display, or HMD. Now I've got some examples up here. We have the Oculus Rift, the HTC Vive, and the PlayStation VR. These are tethered VR systems, which means they are either plugged into a video game console, or in the case of the PlayStation VR, or into a PC, and that's where a lot of the numbers crunching is going on. And we also have the Samsung Gear VR and Google Daydream, which is mobile VR, which is a VR that's based off of mobile phone technology. The display is head-mounted and completely covers your field of vision. So the virtual world that the VR is presenting you is all you can see. In addition, so what you have is, they use various different methods in order to do this, is two screens broadcasting a slightly offset amount of data that your brain interprets as 3D information. And depending upon the product itself, you are basically the camera. Your head is the camera, so objects could be behind you, above you, below you, to your left, and your right. In order to pay attention to them, you have to look and scope your head towards those directions. And one of the great things about virtual reality is that this creates what we call immersion, this sense that you are there. I always tell people that virtual reality is the greatest optical illusion we've ever come up with, because your brain believes that you're there. Someone throws a ball at your head, you duck. If you come to the edge of a virtual cliff, people tend not to go over it. In fact, they'll back away. But the problem with the fact that your entire field of vision is covered is that you don't have the ability to see out of that. If you have to take the headset off to either look at a controller or look at a keyboard and a mouse in order to know what's going on, then you're switching between worlds, and this breaks immersion. Another addition, and I'll go more into this later, but 3D audio and positional audio is an important component of good VR. One of the great tricks we can use with virtual reality is when we put sound emitters at specific locations and they stay in those locations as you move your head. That is a powerful tool, because that is how sounds work in real life. And if you hear a sound behind you, you're more likely to look around behind you and check out what that sound is, because we have a lot of evolutionary things that have happened to us in our past. I always for 100,000 years, if we've heard a sound behind us, if we would traditionally want to go check that out, because it could be a tiger, and you don't know. So it's best if you check to see if that's a tiger or not. And it's a powerful tool, but I'll get more into that later. So the new output method requires a new input method. So the HMD output method requires this new sorts of input method. For the HTC Vive, you have the Vive controller. For the Oculus Rift, you have the touch controller. Now these are what we call 6-DoF controllers, 6 degrees of freedom. So you can move the controller up, down, left, right, forward, back, and also rotate them. So yaw and pitch are part of the controllers. And these are accurately tracked and visually represented in the VR space. For instance, if I was holding a controller like this, there would be a visual representation of said controller in my hand, and it would move. Or something in abstract of that. For instance, in some games, instead of showing you a visual representation of a controller, they'll show you a hand, or a wand, or something else that are part of the game design itself. So these are accurately tracked and visually represented in the space, and they have simple button configurations. As you can see with the HTC Vive, there's a trigger button, 2 grip buttons, and a trackpad, and a menu button. With the Oculus Rift, you've got side buttons, trigger buttons, a control stick, and a couple of buttons on each controller. So they are very simple, and in many cases, the products are designed to use gestures or movements in order to register input. So this is a unique platform, but that unique platform comes with unique challenges. For instance, the HMD can be a challenge in and of itself. A person who has motor impairments, quadriplegics, will require assistance to put on a HMD. Moving your head, people who cannot move their heads around by themselves are going to have limited value to it. So even though they are in a 3D realistic space, they're not able to traverse it or see all the things within it. In addition, some users become disoriented or nauseous in VR. One of the things that we have found is that the #1 cause of disorientation and nausea in virtual reality is dropped frames. So when the frame rate goes under 90 frames per second per eye, that's when people start to notice. And even I, who have a fairly stiff stomach, once frames start to drop, it's very easy for me to pick it out. And I've been working in VR for 2 years now. So that is one way. There's other things that people are working on. People have done studies showing that a virtual nose can help ground the vision on people. There's a lot of really cool stuff being done with gaze tracking, using eye tracking software in order to track the gaze and focus make things make things sharper and blurrier in different areas based upon your gaze. No, sorry, I did that too earlier. So, slight problem here. I'm deleting this. In addition, the input devices and control schemes themselves can also be a challenge. For instance, users with motor impairments can have trouble with the controllers and also the control schemes. As you can see from several of these pictures, including a picture of me that turns up the first time that when you type in accessibility in VR under Google Images, that's the first thing that comes up. I'd like to thank my boss for that. Thanks, Adrian. So as you can see, for someone who is a seated user trying to operate within a space that is designed for people who are standing, since room scale VR games and programs set your head level based upon where it is being tracked, so the headset also has sensors on it, the same sort of sensors that are on the controller that can tell where your head is. And if you're a seated user working in a space that's been designed for people who are standing in it, you can see very quickly where the problems can come into place. I found those almost immediately when dealing with VR, when trying to reach objects that in the real world I couldn't normally reach. Well, guess what? In a virtual space, if they're placed outside of my or a seated user's ability to grasp, they're out of their reach. And that doesn't even get into people who may have grip strength issues, people who may have difficulty making fine gestural movements, and the control schemes that require you to make lots of gestures, like say Tilt Brush, which is a painting program. If you don't have the motor control to make the fine sweeping motions, you're not going to have as much value in that product as you would from a product that can be used just using a mouse and keyboard, or using current accessibility options based off of a mouse and keyboard or off of current controllers. So how can we make VR content accessible? And this is some of the tips and tricks I've picked up. We are still learning. I find this throughout the field. We are all still learning, and not only is it the major players are still learning, but it's still those of us who've been working in the indie game development who are still learning. But one thing I can say is we already know how to make software and video games accessible. The resources exist, use them. For instance, as we've all seen here today with the various people who've talked already and who will be talking after me, the resources are available are online to let people to know that they should create customizable control screens, that they should have color blindness options, that they should have contrast options. All this data is already available to us. It's just making sure that we are also doing them in virtual reality. One of the well, I'll get to that with the next So you cannot assume the capacities of your user or their dimensions. So when you're creating a virtual space, you don't know what kind of person is going to go into that space, what size they will be, what their ability to ambulate through the space is, how good their vision is, how good their hearing is. So you can't make any general assumptions about people, and you have to design for people of various different heights, various different mobility levels, various different ability levels. I was on our Reddit thread for a while there with a gentleman who had purchased a Vive title, and the only way you could interact with said Vive title was using the trigger button. There was no other button that functioned in it. And unfortunately, his brother, who was playing it, was missing these 2 fingers, and he had a very difficult time trying to use it using that one hand. It was a one-handed game too. There was no way to use the other one. So he had to try to hold it in a very uncomfortable position. You can't even assume that your user has full use of their digits or has a full 10 fingers, as it were. So, if there had been a way to change the button mapping on that, so you could change it to one of the grip buttons or to the trackpad, that user would have had no problem using that. But because they had used only the trigger button, that person was unable to use that game. Some of the pushback I get from some developers from time to time is that we are at an early stage in virtual reality. The Vive controller, the touch controller, even the PlayStation Move. These are early stage control methods, and we are, next week, next month, next year, we may have a completely different control scheme that we use for VR. So why spend time considering accessibility options now? What I tell them is that even if we have gesture tracking software, even if we use eye tracking, even if we have various other new sorts of input methods, there are still plenty of design-based solutions that we can use. For instance, making sure that the space in which you are using things to direct making sure that you operate comprehensively in your design. That follows into my next point. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. Be comprehensive in your design. As a narrative designer, when I first started working in VR, the project we were working on, I had objects within the space that I wanted to, it's a room scale game, so I wanted to get people to move around the space and ambulate with it and turn to the right and turn to the left and look behind them and look above them. And I was going, hey, 3D positional audio is great. We hired a audio designer. He was all on board with it. We were going to use Fmod and do positional audio cues, and they would stay in the same place regardless of whether you turned your head, and it was going to be great. So if I, again, using the tiger concern, if I made a noise behind you or wanted someone to turn to the right, I would put sound cues, and we were working on this wonderful system, and it was going to be the coolest thing in the world. And then because in VR, since you can basically, any object that you can pick up, you can hold as close to you or as far away from you as possible, they all had to be hero objects. So we had to hire a 3D prop modeler to make all of our 3D objects. And she was deaf in one ear, and I could not make her turn to the right anymore. And so my entire system was useless for her, and it really opened my eyes and made me realize that, okay, what I need to do now is be more comprehensive. So while keeping the system and not throwing away that, we then began to set up a lighting system that was, instead of being a global lighting emitter, it was positional lighting. So it was more like, spotlights in a stage. And we would turn lights off in one area and turn lights on in another area. And then we would have the character, when your gaze was on it, to move across your field of vision with the lighting following it, with the sound following it, towards the thing I wanted you to look at. And there, I've got multiple different cues. I've got motion cues, I have lighting cues, I have sound cues. The chances of someone not being able to catch any of those is very, very minimal. So be comprehensive. The more different ways you try to deal with the more comprehensive you are in your design, and the more different ways you use in order to direct attention and to do things in the VR space, the less likely you are to come across to make it so that a person cannot follow them. And again, if you do it right, nobody will know you did anything at all. This is what I like to call universal design, or this is following universal design principles, which is something that's very near and dear to my heart. One of the things we did for our project is we created, for our project we had a ball dispenser that would dispense balls, and we had set it at a good height, something that I could use, something my 6'7" art director could use, and it was something that we placed it at a happy medium. But one thing we found very early was the items that were dispensed in it, if the items were all knocked out, and people like playing with things in VR, there's a very childlike desire to throw things around and discover and play with stuff. If that thing was empty and the objects were on the floor, he had to bend over and pick them up. And he had a bad hip, so doing this 2, 3, 4 times just became very painful for him, and he didn't enjoy doing it. So what we ended up doing was putting a detector in the bottom of that bowl, and any time that it was empty, it would dispense another series of objects. You would never need to bend over unless you wanted to. You would always have objects available, and then over time, as they built up, they would fade away, so we didn't have that problem. But nobody, unless we told them, would know that that's an accessibility option, that we put that in there because we didn't want people to hurt their hips or their ankles or their knees by bending over repeatedly. But it's there. So, what can developers do? I'm sure you've all heard this today, but consider accessibility at the earliest stage of development. For instance, when you are prototyping an input model into your game, you need to have in mind how would this input model work. Say you've created an input model to draw something or to hit a drum. Think about someone who only has access to one arm, or who maybe can't make big sweeping arm motions or can't do those sorts of things. How would they be able to use it? A lot of times, two-handed control schemes for someone who's only got one limb or only has functionality in one arm, that can be problematic. So considering that at the early stage when you're prototyping will go a long way, because once you've come up with something that does work for the widest number of users, then you know you're onto something. User testing, again, you'll hear this a lot. User testing with individuals of different sizes, mobility levels, and capacities. And sometimes I get pushback from developers who ask me, well, where do I find these people? One, there's a number of ways you can spoof it. If you're a 5'10" person and able-bodied person, well, sit in your chair and see if you can do it. Move your chair height around and figure out where that is. And they often say, well, I don't know anyone who has hearing impairments, or I don't know anyone who has low vision, or I don't know anyone who's small or tall or whatever. I'm like, do you have family members? Do you have mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, wives, husbands, brothers, sisters? Do the people on your team have those things? As Ian was saying earlier, 22% of Americans have some sort of disability. The chances of you having someone within your tight social circle who can user test this and has some sort of impairment that you want to test are pretty high. And if that's not available, obviously, retirement homes, user groups on the internet, hospitals, children's hospitals are wonderful. As someone who was in a children's hospital at one point, believe me, you put a video game system in front of kids at a hospital, they're going to go nuts. So another thing to keep in mind is don't be constrained by non-VR game design. Don't try for hyper reality when you can make something better than reality. For instance, in real life, if I wanted a glass of water from over there, I would have to travel over to that location, go down the ramp in the back, or go down that lift there, grab it, dispense the water, and bring it back here. If I could do that by using superpowers, wouldn't that be way better? And in virtual reality, nothing's constraining you for that. For instance, when I talk about, head height is a concern in virtual reality, One of the things that I am constantly disappointed in developers not doing is creating customizable spaces where you can move things around within them and set objects at the height that you need them. If I was a person who was sitting and I need this button here, and that's, then I should be able to move that panel to that location, set that button that I need to press right there so I can get it. And that's not just something that's an accessibility concern. Everyone can benefit from that, from being able to create a customizable environment. Like I said at VRDC, we customize our desktops. We should be able to customize our virtual spaces in the same way. Using real-world design concepts to create virtual spaces. For instance, look at architecture. Look at the ways that, say, architects use spaces to direct people's attention and direct user flow through spaces. Stagecraft, again, using the positional lighting in order to direct people's attentions. Web design, using color palettes to evoke emotions. That's all part of what you can do in VR when you don't have access to things like taking control of the camera because it makes people nauseous. And finally, and this is another thing that a number of people have touched upon, promote your accessibility options design choices. Let people know what you've done, what choices you made, and why. We have very little literature, either academic or people just like myself just writing about it on the internet, blogging or doing articles in regards to accessibility in VR right now. The more people who are working in the field and talking about it and talking about the design choices, you're just adding to the knowledge base. And if you are a person who's trying to create an accessible VR experience and can't find a way to make it all work, then write about that too. And let people know why you couldn't get to that stage and what was the thing that was tripping you up. And maybe give someone else an opportunity to figure out a way so that they can say, I'm not going to make that design choice with my product. What can gamers do? Well, you can support game developers who care about accessibility. For instance, Alchemy Labs, who created Job Simulator, the 2050 Archives, and are working on the upcoming Rick and Morty VR. I got a chance to hang out with these guys at VRDC. When they first released their title, a lot of people who were short were having trouble with it. They added a shorter human mode that actually shrunk the size of the space and put you up larger in it. And it was great for me. Northway Games, Rail Games creates a fantastic contraption. A lot of the things I talk about in terms of design, like customizable spaces they've come up with. Like they have done actual implementation. Like their toolkit is a little floating cat. And you can pick it up and put it where you want to get the tools out of it. And if you can throw it away and it'll fly off, and you can press a button and it'll make a little sound and it'll come floating back to you. ILMX Labs, Trials on Tatooine. If you are going to be at GDC tomorrow, go check out their talk on accessibility in VR, because Valve put me in contact with them because after they had taken Trials on Tatooine, and this is a lot of what their talk is about, to a Star Wars convention and suddenly had wheelchair-bound people and people with hearing impairments and all these other sorts of things come up and try their product, suddenly they got some real-life user testing there. And after talking to them and letting them know kind of the best practices I found, the best practices they'd found, we were able to get we were able to come to a consensus on what they could do going forward. So not only is that cool, but it's meaningful, because that means Disney products and, more importantly, Star Wars products will have accessibility in mind coming forward, whether it's being done on commercial VR or whether it's being done at VR that is going to be installations in the various Disney theme parks. Let's see, and also contact developers if you encounter an accessibility issue. There's the chair in a room VR experience. I like to tell this story. There was a gentleman in a wheelchair, and the idea behind it is a horror game where you use environmental puzzles, and he couldn't reach an object. And because of that, he couldn't complete it. He contacted the developer. The developer not only fixed it, but sends that guy early builds of the product, so going forward, to make sure that it doesn't, that problem doesn't happen again. All right, I'm getting the wrap it up signal, so let me because I do tend to talk. So I'm just going to slip this to the very last one. I'm sorry, you're going to miss all these future VR. Oh my gosh, look at those pictures. And then more words that I said. Doesn't make any sense. Final thoughts, oh my gosh. One thing I do want to say is one of the things we're finding in virtual reality that I think is going to make the adoption of accessibility increase in virtual reality is based upon user dimensions. We are finding that people who we would normally consider to be able-bodied are having difficulty operating within VR experiences that have not been designed for them. So because of that, because the larger numbers of people are not able to use it, then I believe that will help drive us forward and as the adoption rates go up, the requirement for accessibility will go up. So thanks for showing up. There's some data, information. I'm on Twitter. There's my email address. There's some stuff I wrote, some videos I'm in, and some other things. So come talk to me. I'm around. Thank you very much.